Today's guest is Dr. Aimie Apigian. She is an MD and a leading medical expert on how life experiences get stored in the body and accelerating the trauma healing journey through her signature model and methodology called the biology of trauma. In today's episode with her, we are learning what the role is of trauma when it comes to your bones, the tools or what role you actually have when it comes to responding to stress, and how you can actually turn into the bone building zone throughout the day versus a bone dissolving zone throughout the day. Welcome, Aimie.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. This is a really important conversation to have.
It is. And you and I started this at breakfast, and it was like mind-blowing for me. And so I'm like, you have to come on and speak to the ladies that listen to my podcast. So welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's begin with the word trauma and the biology of trauma. The name of your book and I believe your programs. So what does that actually mean, the biology of trauma?
Yeah, as a physician, I was taught that when I noticed one of my patients struggling with emotions or there being some emotional connection with their symptoms or their disease, that I should refer them to therapy. And the famous line that I was taught to say was, you should probably go talk to someone about that. And so I had this impression, as I heard many other people do, that it's like trauma is in our mind, it's in our brain, and we need to change our thoughts in order to be able to change our reactions, change our behaviors. And then the more that I've studied the body and the nervous system and trauma, attachment, addictions, that's when I started realizing, no, actually trauma is not as much in the mind and the brain as it is in the body. And there's some kind of talk around, that may be woo-woo of trauma stored in the body. But that's when I started realizing that there's an impact on our biology. And our biology changes. And unless we know how to repair, it doesn't go back. And so that's where I started talking about trauma biology and helping people understand how to repair the effect of trauma on their body and their biology. And then shifts and changes started happening that even I was shocked and surprised at. And so I started leaning more into that and learning more about how does trauma get stored in the body? And more importantly, how can we release that? How can we repair that? Because the effects, and I know we're going to talk about this, the effects are profound across our lifetime if our body continues to hold trauma and overwhelm from our past.
Yes, it is so true. And I've explained to you a little bit before that the work that I do looking at root causes of bone loss, because when you want to reverse bone loss, take control of your bone health, you need to reverse what's happening. And there's all of these causal factors that lead to bone loss. And we can do so much with the diet and lifestyle and all of that, but we have to then get to this underlying, I call they're leaks. And you and I are going to discuss a little bit more about that, leaky bones, because we're going to uncover and raise awareness. I think that that's the big thing. Education is queen. So the more we know and the more we understand, we realize that the thought might start here. We might not see it, so we don't actually understand it, but it actually has a biochemical aspect to it. And that is what you do. And then when you find that, you can manage it in the way that you need to heal, to repair, to restore, or to get rid of it.
Yeah, let me speak to how then that trauma creates ongoing problems like the thoughts and drives our thoughts and reactions. So our body has sensations, and the sensations that we might be more familiar with are something like hunger, thirst, but also there are sensations of that twisting in my gut, that heaviness in my heart, that constriction of my chest that makes it feel like my breath is catching and I can't take a full breath. These are the sensations that represent the different stress and trauma stored in our body. And so when we are going throughout our day, there will be something that our body has a memory of. Maybe it's a smell, maybe it's a sound, maybe it's the feeling that we have when we're in the presence of another person. And all of a sudden, sometimes we're not aware of it, sometimes we are, but all of a sudden our body will have a response. And that response always comes in the form of a sensation. And when we have experienced those sensations in the past, we have felt that we can't allow ourselves to feel them. We're afraid to feel them. And that's why we've stuffed them. That's why we've numbed them. That's why we've avoided them. And so as they come back, as we go throughout our day, there's supposed to be messages from our body of, hey, pay attention here. There might be danger. I need you to notice this. But we have so shut those feelings down because they've become unbearable. Unbearable. We're not able to even feel those sensations. And I'm not even talking about emotions, right? Because emotions, we can label them, which means we can maybe understand them better. Oh, that sensation means sadness, that dropping feeling in my heart, or that constriction in my chest. I label that as anxiety. When we can put a label to it, it helps us understand it. But there are so many sensations that our body has that are intended to be messages for us, but we have blocked them because they have felt unbearable, and they bring up so much fear and pain from the past because of the trauma that's stored in our body. And so literally that thought that we have is actually coming from a sensation that happened first in our body. And the thought comes with that. So there are 3 operating states of our nervous system. It's crazy that we're not taught this. It's crazy that I wasn't taught this in medical school. But there are 3 different operating states of our nervous system, which means our biology. And within each of those states, there is a characteristic type of thought, there is a characteristic type of sensation in the body, and there is a characteristic behavior associated with that. So what helps me then, Debbie, is that when I hear someone say a thought like, oh, I'm not good enough, guess what? Like, I know that that thought means that their body is in a trauma state. It's in the shame place. It's in the place of overwhelm. It's not in the stress place, because that's a different kind of thought. The thought that comes from the stress operating mode of our nervous system is, wow, this is hard, but I'm going to give it my best. It's a very action-oriented. There's still danger, but there's this sense that I think I can overcome it and I'm doing something about it. Whereas in the trauma state, we're past that point. We're going to call that the tipping point. I call it the critical line of overwhelm, where once we've crossed that line, the thoughts, the sensations, the actions are more ones of giving in and giving up, not I'm still going to do my best to overcome this challenge.
Yeah, and what we need to realize is that though that response that we give up and give in could have happened when you were 2, could have happened when you were 5. And so this is why we need to do this deep work because in that the body's all about protection. And inside what's happening, all of the chemicals and the molecules that are needed to run the show, so many of them are stored in our bones. This is where the bone loss takes place when we're in some of these zones. So the one you're talking about, I'm not good enough, which I think there's more awareness around that now. And there's one mantra that I use in my yoga work where it's I am safe, which is the stress place you're speaking about, right? I am safe. And you can do something about it, and you feel like you can do something about it. You're going to be able to respond. But then there's that other place, I am enough, or I have enough, or I'm good enough. And when you go into that place, that's where you need to start uncovering, unpacking, looking back in your life and trying to get rid of those triggers of that gut feeling with the smell, with the taste, with something someone says to you, because that still is in your tissues and is still going to be dissolving your bones if you don't uncover that.
Absolutely. And I want to highlight that through a research study that was done back in the 1960s. It's back in the 1960s, they were doing types of research that we have a hard time with nowadays because it was done on dogs. But it literally shows how much our body and our muscles are programmed based on earlier experiences in our life of we're not good enough, but I'm still living that out in my 50s, in my 60s. So what they did, this was research done by Seligman, and it was around learned helplessness. That was what they said they learned from this research study. It's fascinating. They took a group of dogs and they put them in a container that had a shock on one side of that container. They had a small barrier so that the dogs had to jump over a small barrier that they could all easily jump over in order to get to the other side where there was no electrical shock on the mat, on the floor. But here's where it's hard. Half of the group of dogs, they harnessed them to the wall so that they could not jump when they tried to jump. So I want people to understand that. They could not jump when they tried to jump. And so all of the dogs are in this one side of the container. They start the shocks, and all of the dogs try to jump. That's what we're programmed to do. We are programmed to respond to stress and to danger with action. We don't have to train our body to do that. That's what our nervous system does for us. And so all of the dogs try to jump. Half of the group is successful. And they're on the other side now, and they're going back to their usual business of, peeing and marking their territory or sniffing around, curious, because for them, the danger is over. I did something and I was able to overcome. The other group of dogs, though, they weren't able to escape. And so what happened was then when they went and they did the experiment again, Debbie, this is where it for me just opened my eyes to how I had been programmed for learned helplessness. Without intending it, my parents were doing their best, but that still was part of my wiring and my biology and nervous system coming from childhood. They did the same experiment, except this time they did not harness any of the dogs. So now all of the dogs are free and can jump over that small barrier. They do the same thing. They make the shock, and the dogs that had successfully jumped over before knew exactly what to do. And they jumped over without even hardly a stress because they knew that they could overcome. It makes me so sad. Debbie, the dogs that had been harnessed before, they didn't even try anymore. They had been programmed, and it's not their thinking. These are dogs, right? And I'm sure that they have thoughts. However, this highlights the body, their muscles, their tissues had been programmed to say, we're not even going to try because it's a waste of our energy. And so what those dogs did is they laid down on the mat on top of the electrical shocks and whimpered. And I was like, oh, shoot, I think I've been that person before. I think that's been me sometimes. Now, here's what is exciting, and for me, why I do the work that I do, because they were able to retrain those dogs to jump over. But here's how they had to do it. They actually had to get the humans, the research assistants, to physically move their muscles in the same way that they would if they were jumping over that barrier, to reprogram their body, their tissues, their muscles that, no, this is how you move in response to this danger. And it was only until then that they were able to retrain those dogs. They tried everything before that. They tried putting treats. They tried coercing. They tried everything. And the only thing that works to reprogram the body from past overwhelm and pain and trauma is the actual working with the body and the tissues to reprogram the movement that I can, that's it. I can do this. I can take action. And that is then how we need to work with our own body. And so as we look at bones, right? Like I have broken this collarbone 4 times.
How?
Exactly, 4 times.
What were you doing?
Well, each time has a different story.
Okay.
But the first time was a huge, experience for me. I was out in the ocean. I was body surfing. A huge wave came in. I was not ready for it. It knocked me down, tumbled me inside the water, slammed me down to the sand. I was lucky to walk away alive because I hit right here and it could have hit on top of my head. But then it was like my body was programmed after that to, oh, this is just what we do. We roll and we break. And so it wouldn't take much more. It was another, just fall off of my bike. It was a car accident. It was another bike accident. And each time it's like my body just went to the same thing. Oh, we know what to do. And the bone breaks. And the bone breaking is the equivalent of trauma for our body. We can put stress on our bones. And as you know and teach, stress on the bones is a good thing. That's actually how we grow our bones to be stronger. So we want to be walking. We want to be doing those things that put enough stress, but not too much stress. So there's two reasons why we cross that line and break instead of grow. And the two reasons are too much too fast. Something comes at me too much too fast. I just don't have time. And if I don't have time to process it, my body goes into overwhelm. But the other reason, Debbie, is too little for too long. And I think this is where most of your women are at. By this time of our age, we have experienced so much, and we haven't done the best at repairing. We haven't done the best at nurturing, at nourishing, at replenishing. And so our body is living in a state of depletion and deficiency. And if nothing is going on, we may be okay. But at the slightest danger, stress, problem, pressure, person that bothers us, we're already in a state of deficiency. We don't have any extra reserves. And we're crossing that tipping point, that we're crossing that critical line of overwhelm and going into that place of shutdown. And that would be how it feels to go into the trauma response from the stress response. The stress response is going to be high action. I'm going to do something. And the trauma response is, I'm just going to shut down. It's so much that I can't even start. So there's an element of paralysis. There's an element of heaviness. There's an element of, I don't have the energy to do anything. I may not even have the energy to care. And so that's how we can recognize when our body is literally in that trauma operating state. And of course, once we understand that, we realize that it's happening a lot more than that big bad event. Our body's going into the trauma state or the trauma biology sometimes every day. A lot of the women that come into my program, they're waking up in a trauma state. How do we know that? Because of their thoughts. And the first thought that they have is, oh, shoot, is it morning already? I don't want to get up. That is the heaviness. That is the shutdown. And then, of course, what we have figured out is strategies in order to make ourselves get up, in order to make ourselves still do things. And so we start our day with coffee. Caffeine is a great way to pull us out of that heaviness because it gives us adrenaline, it gives us some dopamine, gives us some energy. Now, of course, when we're already running on fumes, that comes at a cost because there's not much in the gas tank. And yet we're driving it with caffeine. Or maybe like me, you were driving it with exercise or driving it with food. And then I realized that the food that I was craving was actually ones that I had a sensitivity to. Why? Because the foods that we're sensitive to release histamine, and histamine releases adrenaline. So here, once again, my body in its wisdom has figured out how to help me keep going, how to help me push through when I don't have the energy to do so.
Okay, so much here. So just what I want to help women understand or get here is that as we live our lives and as we go through stress, so the first part is stress, we have that opportunity to respond. And as we're going through that, our bones play such a critical role throughout our life, right? They're the bank that stores the minerals that kind of help run the show. So we have that. Then in this population now where we are in our lives, we went through the fat-free generation, not eating fat, eating too much sugar. We were trying to be really thin, so we were really undernourished, taking in too few calories. There's the other component of exercise. There's the Jane Fonda, the Olivia Newton-John. We were doing all of that stuff like high intensity, burning through more physical like minerals and stores. So we have the background of the stress, the background of the trauma. We have the lifestyle piece of maybe not nourishing ourselves enough. And there's a driver there, as you said. There's a driver behind, whether it's food sensitivities and histamine, the need for the body to be able to fight, to be able to protect you, needs things. And so it's using up your stores, or it's causing the cravings, because sugar is a quick fuel source, or fat is a quick fuel source, or simple carbs that can get converted to energy. So all of these cravings, I find a lot of the women I work with, it's really interesting to me because I don't even really eat sugar, but I find so many of the women that I work with eat sugar. And if they only understood that this is why, because your body needs to protect you, or needs to run the show with what's going on in your life throughout your whole life. So it's that the education behind the why of what's happening, and then you can learn what you need to do from there.
Yes, and I love that the bones are the reservoir for us. I mean, they're so strong, right? They're the strongest tissue that we have. And so when I think of them being a rock for us, them being that source of stability for us, that's what they're intended to be. And as you say, in the stress response, our body's tapping into them to say, hey, can I borrow some of your calcium? Hey, can I borrow some of your minerals? Because we're in a stress response. We need to overcome this danger. Can you help us out? And of course, our bones share leaf free. And so they are sharing these minerals and these resources that then, because we're not repairing and replenishing, it puts us in a state of deficiency. And like I said, when we don't have anything going on, we might be able to be okay and function okay, even though we have a state of deficiency in our bones. But as soon as a problem happens, as soon as pressure, change is always a stress. I don't even care if it's a good change. Change is stress. And you need a stress response, which needs minerals in order to accomplish that change. And it goes to the bones, and our bones are like, we've already given you everything that we've had. We don't have any more to give you. And that is when, because of that bone, the leakiness in the bones, then our tipping point, we cross that sooner because we don't have the reserves from our bones that we are intended and that we want to have. And so the challenge is that it creates a vicious cycle where the more trauma that we're holding, if you want to call it that, or you can just simply talk about overwhelm and pain, because that's what it is. The more overwhelm that we have, the more that it has pulled from our bones. And yet, the more that it has pulled from our bones, the easier it is for us to go into that trauma place.
Yeah, and then there's one other piece to this puzzle, because what we're really speaking about, and I hope this is clear, is that in the short run, stress is protection, and it's going to help us, and we might have the reserves for that. And what happens inside, there's a breakdown that's happening inside the body to free up energy for your muscles, for your heart to pump, for your blood vessels, your eyes to dilate, contract, for you to escape the situation. The other piece to this, so the tipping point comes from stress to trauma, and I want to go into that. But the other piece to this is that the gut plays such a role here, because bringing in the storage for your bones, bringing in the nutrients, the building tissues of your body comes through the gut, and the gut is turned off during the stress response because the body is going to conserve energy, and you're not going to be digesting and absorbing nutrients when you're in this stress zone. And then we'll talk about going into the trauma zone. That's what I think is really critical here, is how did I get here? How did I get to this level of bone density or this lack of strength in my bones to make them more fracture, a greater risk of fracture? It's if you've had this chronically over your life, whether you experience it as a gut reaction or you feel tense, when you notice some of those signals you were talking about, we feel a lot of that in the gut. And we have to understand that your body is either in a building or a dissolving mode. And the stress mode is dissolving. The trauma mode is dissolving. The building mode, we have to be relaxed. We have to feel safe. And we then have to be able to digest and absorb the nutrients to create more stores in our bones and in the other parts of our body. So this is why managing stress is so critical, because not only do you need to maintain your storage of minerals and not deplete your bones, not let the leaks happen, you also need to continuously be in a zone where you can actually replenish and bring in the food and digest and absorb. And the nervous system, you could speak a little bit maybe about the nervous system. We go from one area to the other, but we go from the building zone to the dissolving zone. So I think that that's what I think is a real big piece of awareness I'd love women to understand, is that you are either building or dissolving. How do you set yourself up to be more in the building zone? And what is that dissolving bone? And that's what we're talking about, that dissolving zone, dissolving bone. It kind of rhymes, the zone and the bone. So that's what we're trying to figure out here, because we have control over this.
And the challenge is that once the body is holding pain, fear, and overwhelm from our past, it never got its reset. And so it gets stuck in the loop because it's still trying to complete this response that it had to being overwhelmed. And until it has that resolution, it stays stuck in that loop. And it loops between stress and the high energy state and then the shutdown, which is the low energy and the trauma state. And it literally loops between those two, Debbie, which means, like what you're saying, it never gets that time in the repair phase. It never gets that time in the building the bones. Never does. And so how do we get out of that loop? That is the work of women today, is for us to recognize that we are in that loop. We just loop between stress and then feeling overwhelmed, stress and feeling overwhelmed. The work is to get out of that loop, because that is the only way to then truly be able to give your bones the time and the nutrients in order to build and not continue to break down.
Yeah, it's like we can't be the dogs on the mat. And so we have to understand that we have become the dogs on the mat, that weren't able to move, that overwhelm. And Aimie, this is as simple as you on the playground not being involved with the other girls, or you with your family and the interaction of the family, or the lineage that you come from. And so these are either known traumas, it could be big life events that have happened, but it also can be your whole journey. So to even look at your journey and to understand this. So hopefully it's the raised awareness around this, triggering back and forth, building, dissolving, and we want to focus on building. So explain some of the methodologies you use, what you share on how to do this.
Yeah, so the body needs very specific things in order to come out of that loop. And when it has been storing fear, pain, and overwhelm, it needs three things. These three things are probably not going to surprise you or any of your women that you serve. They are, first of all, safety. Now, I think of it as a turtle in its shell. When there is a danger that's coming and it's close enough that it could hurt the turtle, it pulls its head and its feet inside of its shell. And I don't care what you do, it's not going to put its head out until it knows that it's safe. And that's the same thing with our body. Our body is just it's waiting. It literally is waiting for that message of, okay, the danger's over, for it to come out and complete this response. And that is what we often are missing. So many of us don't even know that our body is still just kind of like that full inhalation, right? Like, oh, there's danger. And then we're never getting the message that the danger's over. So we stay living like that. And so safety has to be one of the first things that we do. Everything else is based on safety. If our body doesn't feel safe, it won't even be able to accept the supplement protocols or the detox protocols or whatever else that we're trying to do to help our body because it's still in danger mode. So safety is going to be one thing that it has to have to come out of this chronic overwhelm and trauma biology state. But then it's not just safety. So what we learn from especially the animal kingdom is time. We do see some animals that they also go into this paralysis. They have this freeze response. You can think of opossums that just play dead. And their body is on a timer, meaning they can't just bounce out of it. Their body has to go through a process of if it goes all the way into that playing dead, it needs time to reset. It needs time. And so that would be another factor, is that we have to give that body time and feeling safe. This is not just telling ourselves that we're safe. This does not work with just saying mantras. This is actually creating a felt sense of safety, which is what I've learned that I can teach people how to do for themselves. But then we also need energy. And that's where the biology piece comes in, because I can teach you somatic work, which is lovely to be able to create a felt sense of safety within 2 minutes, and your nervous system will shift into that calm alive, parasympathetic, the phase where your bones will be building, but it's not going to stick. It's not going to last unless you have the energy to stay in that place. And so we have to also address the biology and look at what are those things that are draining our energy. How is our mitochondria? How is our gut? What is the toxin load that we're exposed to or that we're carrying around? How much inflammation do I have? The more trauma burden that our body is carrying, the more brain inflammation that we have. Brain inflammation is a huge drain on our energy. And brain inflammation can be triggered by things like, I didn't sleep well last night, or I traveled and I was exposed to the radiation from airplanes and all of that. And our brain is sensitive to that. So we can experience this overwhelm from non-emotional things and yet still feel that heaviness and that shutdown because it's an energy problem. Trauma is an energy problem. And so those are the three things, Debbie, that the body needs to come out of that chronic trauma state: safety, time, and energy. But then this is what happens, and most people don't know this. So when this happens, they start thinking that they've done something wrong. What happens is that as the body comes out of the chronic overwhelm and shutdown place, it follows its steps back to where it was right before it went into that shutdown. And right before it went into shutdown, it was in stress mode. We know the 5 steps of the body's instinctual trauma response. Starts with a startle, and then stress, and then we hit the wall, meaning we become powerless, we feel trapped, there's nothing we can do. We freeze in that moment, realizing our powerlessness, and then we shut down because it's better to conserve our energy than to use our energy like we do in the stress response. Our body walks that same path to get out of these states and to complete these responses. And so when we come out of chronic overwhelm, guess where we go? We go into stress. And now someone's feeling more anxious. Now someone's feeling angry. Now someone has like all this energy and they may not be sleeping well because their body just seems to have all of this energy. And they think that they're doing something wrong. No, we have to go through that step to then get all the way back into that parasympathetic and calm alive and have it stick. And so this is what I do in my courses, is I teach people how to work with each of these different steps that their body is going to need to go through in order to fully come out of this loop and this chronic overwhelm and stress state. And it is absolutely beautiful. And I just want to highlight this because we've been talking about that stress response some today. There's such a bad rap that stress gets, and yet stress is not the bad thing. It's when our body goes into the trauma and then it gets stuck in the loop. But stress is a good thing. Stress allows us to live our life's purpose. Stress allows us to face a challenge and overcome it and do new things in our life. It allows us to create change in our life. So stress is actually a good thing. What we need to do is learn how to widen our window for our ability to generate and mount a good stress response so that we can overcome rather than break. And so that is part of the work that I teach people is how to work with your stress. We don't want to reduce your stress. We want to actually work with it and then be really selective about, does this deserve my stress response? Does that phone call, does that text message, does that news, does that person really deserve my stress response? Because now my stress response is sacred. It's pulling minerals from my bones. It's shutting my digestive system down. It's raising my blood pressure, which is great if I am really wanting to overcome a challenge. But many times, this does not deserve my stress response. And so we get to learn how to work and live with our stress response in a very different way than just trying to say, I don't want any stress and I just need to reduce it all. No, what we're trying to actually reduce is the overwhelm and come out of the overwhelm. We will come back into the stress response. And then as we learn to work with it, our body will start living more naturally and more time in that parasympathetic bone building phase.
Yeah, the bone building phase is the parasympathetic, and the sympathetic is the bone dissolving phase. Something you just said, does this deserve my stress? I think that is such a self-care, self-awareness piece for us to all have. Does this deserve my stress response? Does this deserve my body to go into a breakdown phase over? And that happens with what you watch, what you listen to, what you put in your body. The choice of building and dissolving, whether it's your bones or your hormones or whatever, exists for us. And so to raise awareness to that, I always say that with food, when you open the refrigerator, when you look at a food, will this build my bones or dissolve my bones? So now to even think of how I show up every day, all day, does this deserve my reserves, my bones to dissolve the minerals so I can respond to whatever it is? And even understanding that it's not just the conversation you have with someone that's stressful. It's the TV show you're watching. It's the news you're bringing into your life. And I always tell people, I don't watch news. And it's not because I'm intelligent. It's not because I want to put my head in the sand. It's because does my body, does this deserve my emotions, my feelings? Because it's going to wreck my peace, dissolve my bones, and take away from my energy that I need in my life right now to follow the mission that I'm following.
It gets me so excited because I think that if women felt more empowered to ask that question, they would live their life very differently. And they would be taking more proactive decisions about what is best for them, and their sense of inner peace would build to such a level that they would become unshakable.
And unbreakable.
And unbreakable, Debbie.
And that's what we want, unbreakable. The diagnosis of osteoporosis, osteopenia, so disempowering, puts you in the fear zone where you're not using stress as your friend to pull and push on your bones and create stronger fracture-resistant bones. And so does this deserve it? And that's where the biology piece comes in, right? When you are making the decision, does this deserve my stress response? It's because you understand that there's a biological component that in the background, your body has a biochemical reaction and you're shifting into the zone of breakdown. You're taking yourself out of digesting, absorbing, and assimilating your nutrients. And this is what I found for years working with women, looking for root causes. You mentioned a lot of the background stressors, the toxins, the gut, nutrient absorption, the histamines, food sensitivities, inflammatory triggers. Those are root causes of disease, whether it's osteoporosis or other diseases. And so if that is what the stress response, the hidden stress inside is a part of, we need to show up every day and choose where we're going to be using our stress and our biology and our minerals and that we actually have that choice. That's so empowering.
We do have that choice. And then we get to choose to schedule the rest so that we have stress and rest. Stress and rest is the key to growth and bone building.
Yes, and when I first approached you, Aimie, I noticed from afar how well you are at managing your energy. And I didn't understand when I made that comment to you that you are actually implementing your right in every moment. Does this deserve my stress? And I actually, it's observable. I've seen that with you. I see how you show up in whenever I'm with you physically or even online in the group that we're in. I could feel that, and now I get it.
Yeah, it's a very different place to live life from making choices rather than feeling like life is happening to me.
Yeah, it's empowering. It's powerful. Well, anything else you'd like to share? Because I feel like where we just got to here is really, hopefully, very thought provoking, and it's where I come to in all the work that I do. I can heal or help them heal their guts, guide them on food and movement and all of that. And then there they are. And now it's the deeper work that needs to take place. And this is why I want to share the work you do with my community, because it is so needed for all of us to learn, does this deserve my stress? And, the deeper work that you're doing, because you said we go between the stress and trauma. And we don't always know how we became the dogs on the mat, but we have that in us. And in the background, that's dissolving, dissolving, dissolving. So doing the work to learn the tools. So can you share what your program is, what you do? It can be brief and it'll be in the show notes as well, but just a little bit about what you offer for women to find you and to learn these tools.
Yeah, and once I saw how much this had changed me, that was what compelled me to teach this for other people. And it actually came out of caring for a friend. And in his final days, last 2 weeks, he was passing away from COVID complications. And when I saw that I actually was able to stay fully present and I didn't try to make myself busy to avoid my emotions of sadness and grief, but was actually able to give him the gift that I had wanted to, which was to be by his side and to not have him pass away alone. And I was able to do that for him. And it was there sitting by his bedside, holding his hand as he passed away, that I was like, I think other people want to know how to change their life like this. And so I sat there right there, holding his hand, and designed what exercises have made the most impact on me and my ability to change these patterns of learned helplessness and being at the mercy of life rather than making powerful decisions about my stress response and creating that internal safety to come out of overwhelm. And so what I do is I teach them the very same exercises that have made the most difference for me. And the way that I've done that is I've broken it up into phases so that while it all needs to be done, we don't and can't do it all right now. And so I walk people through the essential sequence, which is just that, the starting with safety, and then we move into stress and support, and then we move into the expansion and the possibilities that we can do when we're in parasympathetic. But people need to know how the tools, the actual body-based tools to do that. So we're not working with the mind. We're not trying to just change our thoughts. I'm teaching them body-based exercises, different movement, different touch, different things that they should know about their senses and their anatomy, that if we do this, if we move in this way, if we touch right here with this kind of pressure, this is what shifts inside of our body. Here's why. Vagus nerve is often involved. And so it's the first phase is just very skills-based to have people know how to create that felt sense of safety, support, and then titrate or pace themselves with growth, with change, with expansion, so we don't fall back into overwhelm. Once we're done with that initial phase, then we really start working on the integration of all of the pieces, the body-based movements, the different thoughts and parts work that we have, the different beliefs that we can have about ourselves and how that influences our health, like bone loss, like inflammation, autoimmunity, chronic pain. And so now we're bringing in the biology to really shift the inner world and our biology into one of safety that sticks. It's not just something that you'll, do and have to keep doing necessarily every few hours because you've fallen back into overwhelm. Now that we're working on that level, we're really working with our neuroplasticity, things that take time for our body to rewire. So there's different phases, but I walk them through then all the different steps of the body's trauma response, learning how to work with each one to know what to do so that they can shift their nervous system and actually have mastery and be aligned, working with their body rather than fighting against their body.
Yeah, that's great. We'll have more information in the show notes as well. Yeah. Aimie, thank you so much. This is really, really valuable. We say that that stress is behind 80 to 90% of all disease. And really, you bring in the component of trauma and
It's really trauma. It's not stress, it's trauma.
It's not, exactly, because stress is the short run. And that's the big thing too. Stress is short run. It's what we use to build bones. We stress them out in the moment. We respond in the moment. It really is this trauma piece. And we need to do the work to overcome that and to get back our power.
Yeah. And we can do it. It is possible, and we can do it. I work with women who are in their 90s, and they are still now figuring out that they feel like they're living their best life because of how empowered they are to work with their body, understand their body, and make very different decisions that allow them to have a very different life.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the work that I do, you get a DEXA scan every 2 years. And I'll do this work where I'm running functional labs, healing gut, digestion, they're pooping again, sleeping better, mentally, emotionally, not having that anxiety. So there's things that are happening, nails are better, things are happening. They haven't yet had the next DEXA scan that could tell them if there was a shift in their bone density, yet their mindset, their confidence increases. And so if you can do it at that level, you could feel and know that you're strong. That is super powerful.
Yeah. And we want powerful women.
We want powerful women. We do. Aimie, thank you so much. Thanks for the work you're doing. And thank you for speaking and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thanks for joining me on Stronger Bones Lifestyle. Are you ready to take charge of your future? For show notes, resources, and information on my programs, please visit DebbieRobinson.com. If today's episode empowered you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs it. Together, we're building stronger bones and stronger lives. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.